December the 8th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today on the show, after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare and the, the Pledge of Allegiance and the singing the Star Spangled Banner, we will have brainwashing, recipes, no free lunch, real philosophy, consensus, and consensus foreign policy. All that and more when I come back. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for December the 8th. I will hear your prayer. My child, when you call on me, I will answer you. I will turn my ear to your prayer and show you the wonders of my great love. I will keep you as the apple of my eye and hide you in the shadow of my wings from the wicked who are out to destroy you. I will rise up and confront your enemies and bring them down. I will rescue you from the wicked with my sword and save you from such people. My eyes are on the righteous, and my ears are attentive to their prayer. But my face is against those who do evil. Prayer declaration. You have heard my supplication and will receive my prayer. You have said that you will answer my prayers and have set a time when you will come to save me. You will hear the prayer of the destitute and will not despise their prayer. You will hear the groaning of the prisoner and will release those appointed to death. Before I call, you will answer, and while I am speaking, you will hear. Amen. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for December the 8th. Thank you. And now I'm going to be reading a selection from the prologue of the book called 10 Philosophical Mistakes. And the prologue is called Little Errors in the Beginning. And this is a book written by Dr. Mortimer Adler. I highly recommend the books by Adler in general. There's some that are I don't particularly care for, but his book on Aristotle is absolutely excellent. This particular book is also excellent for reasons that I will get into in a minute. Quote, "The least initial deviation from the truth is multiplied later a thousandfold, unquote. So wrote Aristotle in the 4th century BC. 16 centuries later, Thomas Aquinas echoed this observation. Paraphrasing it, he said in effect that little errors in the beginning lead to serious consequences in the end. Neither Aristotle nor Aquinas had in mind the philosophical mistakes, all little errors in the beginning, with which this book is concerned. All of them are modern philosophical errors, mistakes made by philosophers since the 17th century, the century that was marked by departures in thought initiated by Thomas Hobbes in England and by René Descartes in France. In one or two instances, the philosophical errors with which we will here be concerned repeat errors that first occurred in antiquity. But this does not alter the fact that all of these mistakes are typically, if not wholly, modern in origin and in the serious consequences to which they have led in modern thought. Those serious consequences not only pervade contemporary philosophical thought, but also manifest themselves in popular misconceptions widely prevalent today. They all tend in the same direction. They affect our understanding of ourselves, our lives, our institutions, and our experience. They mislead our action as well as becloud our thought. They are not cloistered errors of merely academic significance. They've been popularized and spread abroad in a variety of ways. Many of us have unwittingly harbored some of these mistakes in our minds without knowing whence or how they came there. And this is the book to read if you really want to understand more about what I'm talking about when I say brainwashing, that we've been brainwashed by the left in this country. And Dr. Adler is describing the process of brainwashing and where it got started, the foundations of this brainwashing. So it's an excellent book. And again, I highly recommend it, again, for learning the foundations of where it is that we're, or how we're getting brainwashed by the left in this country. Thank you. And now I'm going to be reading from an article written by the writer-in-residence at Victoria magazine, and it's titled Life by Hand. My mother was a woman who loved to host dinners and cocktail parties, wide-ranging in her choices of dishes, an early adopter of avocados and jicama. Her baked scallop appetizers, dusted with homemade breadcrumbs and broiled in the oven, were plated on actual shells. But she was also a fervent believer in recipes. In our household, it was always a half a cup of flour, not a handful, quarter teaspoon of salt, never a pinch. I still have her battered copy of The Joy of Cooking, although I'll admit I never use it. For me, recipes always felt like that teacher in English class, the one with the red pen, ready to swoop down on any grammatical transgression. As a child, I tried to follow the directions as given. If we didn't have the required 3/4 cup of white sugar, I waited until my mother bought more. I fretted if I didn't level my teaspoon of baking soda, would the cookie still rise? When the dough was finally ready, I set the timer for the designated 12 minutes and waited, ignoring the olfactory warnings, finally opening the oven door to a scene of charred destruction because our oven ran hot. A few times, miraculously, everything came together, and I reveled in carrying a still warm cookie to my father and seeing the happiness on his face as he took a bite. But all too often, when it came to cooking, it was red pen time. It wasn't until I was 38 and my husband, 2 children, and I were relocated to Italy for 2 years that everything changed. It's a funny thing, moving to a foreign country where you don't speak the language. The rules, for social interactions, for grammar, for how to do something as simple as buying a piece of fruit, no longer apply. Nothing is comprehensible, and thus, in an odd way, anything is possible. It's a chance to reconsider yourself without the familial and cultural expectations that have been added to you layer by layer, year after year. Now you can ask, who are you at heart? What do you truly want? I was not, of course, thinking so philosophically at the time. I was trying to figure out how to answer a telephone, pronto, or what caballo means. It's horse, not hamburger, by the way. I didn't have a lot of time to think about life's lessons, which, of course, is often when they come to us. Mine came through my nose as I walked the cobblestone streets of the old town where we had landed. Pasta sauce simmering on a stove, coloring the air. Small bakeries wafting out scents of yeast and melting butter and chocolate. Fruit vendors, their displays of fresh, tiny strawberries warming in the sun, tempting you to eat now because this was their moment of perfect ripeness. After decades of big grocery stores, of produce picked and packaged for long journeys, the immediacy of it was all intoxicating. It made me want to try things. My first experiment came in the fall, when colder weather turns one's thoughts towards soup. Minestrone, in my case. I always used cans before, but it seemed appropriate to try from scratch. I got my cloth shopping bag and went to the local vegetable stand about a block away. It was run by an old man who held that spot for 40 years, and his produce was extraordinary. Gorgeous purple eggplants, deep green zucchini, onions that seemed pulled from the ground that morning. It was like something out of an oil painting. In my fractured Italian, I told the vendor about my plan for soup. What should I put in it, I asked. He looked at me with amused disbelief. Then he opened his arms wide to the glory that was his vegetable stand and said, anything you want. It shocked me, the infinity of that statement. And then somewhere deep inside me, a door opened. So, in January, I signed up for a cooking class for expats, taught by an Italian matron. Ernesta was short and squat and absolutely no nonsense. Her hands knew the weight of a cup of flour like I knew the alphabet. Her nose could read the air, sense the exact moment the pasta was al dente or the cake was a perfect golden brown in the oven. She didn't use timers or measuring cups or recipes, and it was only when we foreigners begged for them that she begrudgingly wrote them down. In grams, in Italian. Truly, it was more work to try and translate it all. It was easier to just watch the magic of her as she cooked, the way she leaned into the ingredients like they were friends, her confidence when she was kneading a ball of dough until it became firmly elastic, its texture soft as cashmere. What a better goal than the sharp ding of a timer? How much more satisfying to know with your fingers when something was perfect. I saw that, for Ernesta, recipes were a language that lived inside her, not on a page, so that winter I started experimenting myself. Tiny steps at first. I'd look up a recipe on the internet and then visit its surrounding neighbors, borrowing elements as needed or tempted. In the process, I learned about substitutions, basic ratios, flavors that like to play together. I started paying attention to my senses of taste and smell and touch and hearing, and realized that those less utilized senses offered me a far higher likelihood of success. Because here's the thing. Every recipe is created in a situation that will never be truly replicated again. Every kitchen, every cook is different. Every medium zucchini is a different size. Every hand will firmly pack a cup of brown sugar to its own density. And recipes, while they can be helpful, can also be an excuse or an invitation not to pay attention. By shifting away from recipes, I shifted into the food, the experience, and that made all the difference. Sure, there was a catastrophe or two, but far fewer than I expected, and the joy of paying attention, of doing what felt right, was infectious. Over the years, I started applying the same approach to writing and parenting and marriage, taking a good look at the rules I've been following, figuring out what worked for me, experimenting, using all my senses to discover what made the words flow or a child happy. Because just as every kitchen or cook is different, so too is every child, every spouse, every writer. Some authors write best in the morning, others at night. Some children need firm boundaries, some need to fly. Some marriages thrive as part of a community while others grow best in seclusion. No two stoves cook the same. The lesson I've learned through all of this is not to give up recipes altogether. They are roadmaps, wisdom left behind by fellow travelers, and there's much we can gain from them. The trick is to take that knowledge inside yourself and create your own language, your own recipe, ones that fit your kitchen, your family, your life. And that was an article from the Victoria magazine, and by their writer in residence. And I put this, or included this, because I want to also remind people of culture, and remind people conservatives are cultural. The left is not. The left doesn't give a hoot for culture. The left is materialistic, although they pretend to be otherwise. And so this is a reminder for conservatives about what it's really all about. And the basis, the foundation for culture is marriage and family. And that's what that article, when you get right down to it, was all about. Thank you. And now I'm going to read a segment from the book called No Free Lunch. Quote, opulent, civilized, and industrious nations are greater consumers than poor ones because they are infinitely greater producers, unquote. By Jean-Baptiste Say. The cause and effect here is so important. While we can't help but envy consumption and note the satisfaction that consumption of wants brings, we must note that great consumers are always and forever first great producers. The opulence, civility, and industry they enjoy comes only anecdotally from consumption, but at a far deeper level from their capacity for production, which economically makes consumption possible and existentially brings purpose. An excellent little segment from a book, again, that I highly recommend, called No Free Lunch. Thank you. And now a segment from the book Real Philosophy for Real People. Let's see. For an education to be worthy of the human person, the human community, and the flourishing of both, it must span the entire spectrum illustrated by the above parallel continua, which describe what the range of a sound education entails. With this scope of a sound education in mind, let's turn now to consider a method for putting to critical use what such an education can offer. We've all been involved in arguments, discussions, and disputes. Often these encounters lead to frustration rather than fruition. Very often we are confident that our position is sound and our assertions are true, but we cannot seem to articulate why what we hold is sound and true. Likewise, we may deeply suspect that what another says is doubtful or wrong or perhaps even despicable. But again, we cannot quite seem to articulate why we suspect that the other party is in error. We find ourselves with others in a tangle of claims and counterclaims, assertions and assumptions. Very often we find the conversation jumping from one topic to another as evidence and argument are hurled back and forth. No progress is made, and eventually we throw up our hands in exasperation, and if we are polite, we might suggest to others that the best we can do is to agree to disagree. While that apparently polite termination of discussion may be tempting, especially since it seems to be less painful than banging one's head against a conversational brick wall, that inclination to, quote, agree to disagree, unquote, can stem from and even encourage lazy and sloppy thinking. That inclination can corrode individual, communal, and cultural commitment to finding the truth. It unjustly severs us from the obligation to hold ourselves and others accountable for the claims that are made. It can appear to absolve us from any duty to know what is truly real, human, and good. Granted, there are topics about which honorable people may disagree, but those topics are actually rarer than the dictatorship of relativism would have us believe. One reason I've chosen to undertake the writing of this book is that I fear that today we are too readily inclined to give up on using contested conversation as a means towards arriving at truth. I think that we should be most reluctant to give up on efforts to find a true resolution of differences. Even if we articulate our position only imperfectly, even if we can justify our moral claims and our assertions of truth only provisionally, let us, in the words of Paul Weiss, at least make an effort that is worthy of a refutation. Let's pay truth, humanity, goodness, and our interlocutors the compliment of our best efforts, rather than settling for offering them a shrug of the shoulders and the tacit, polite, but often facile admission of failure known as agreeing to disagree. And that was a section of the book called Real Philosophy for Real People. On the news yesterday, apparently old Joe has been in touch with Vladimir Putin in Russia over the issue of Ukraine. So one of the it reminded me of the issue, the foreign policy of true conservatives and true conservatism, and that has to be realistic. And so the foreign policy of a truly conservative administration would be to acknowledge that we are the world's only superpower, economically and militarily, and to act accordingly. And what that means is that for the vast majority of issues and problems, the United States would be delegating authority. So, for instance, there's been problems in Hong Kong where there's been protests and people in Hong Kong, the people who live in Hong Kong fighting against the Chinese government and protesting, etc. And those people will display American flags and sing the national anthem, etc. But Hong Kong was a British possession. They leased it, basically, from the Communist Chinese government. They had a 70-year lease. And when the lease was up, it got turned back over to the Communist Chinese. So this whole notion of appealing to America, that's all fine and dandy, but it's a British problem. The British know Hong Kong better than we do. They speak the language because, again, they were there for 70 years. So anything that goes off in Hong Kong, a truly conservative administration would announce in a press conference that it's up to the Brits to handle the issue, and if they need help, we'll consider that, but basically it's a British issue. The same thing goes with Somalia. We should have never gotten involved in Somalia. Somalia at one point was an Italian colony. And at the time we went into Somalia, the Italians still had a military base in Somalia. And so we should have immediately announced, as things are deteriorating in Somalia, that we're going to hold, and the world is going to hold, the Italian people accountable for what goes on in Somalia, and that it's going to be up to the Italians, the Italian government, the Italian people to fix the problem. Too often, although we're the world's superpower, we don't act like it. What we end up acting like is the world's super janitor. Somebody around the world poops their pants, and then there's the call for, hey, United States, clean up on aisle 5. No, that should not happen. We should bring an end to that policy. Okay. In most cases, you look at Venezuela, it was a Spanish colony. Haiti was a French colony. Vietnam was a French colony. So in the case of North Korea, that would be something I would delegate if it was I was a president, then I would delegate that to either South Korea or to Japan, one of the two, probably South Korea. The Japanese and the Koreans are not always on the best of terms, but certainly I would go ahead and delegate the issues of what it is we should do or how we should act vis-a-vis the North Koreans to South Korea. And so this way we're acting like a superpower. We are large and in charge, and we're not going to be out cleaning up other people's messes. Now, how does this relate to Joe Biden? The left wants to do things with consensus. There's no leadership in consensus. Taking a vote is not leadership. Okay? So, old Joe went ahead and had a conversation with Putin, but only after consulting with our allies. And then after that conversation took place, he went ahead and debriefed our allies, again, to achieve and maintain some sort of a consensus. And the fact of the matter is that socialism has not taken hold around the world, and it's basically socializing. What he did is socializing foreign policy. And anybody in their right mind should say no to that. If we're the superpower, then we make the decisions, we accept the responsibilities, we assert our authority. If there's two superpowers, then maybe there's an issue in terms of consensus. But as of right now, we're the world's superpower. It's our decision, our responsibility, and we don't need or want a consensus. Thank you, and I wanted to remind everybody about listening to the John and Ken Show Monday through Friday, 2 to 6 p.m., and I also wanted to remind everybody about Rick Edelman. He's also a person that communicates in a very conservative manner. No equivocating, no waffling. They know what's going on, and they act like it. So and Rick Edelman is on also KFI 2 to 4 p.m. on KFI on Sundays. And that's 2 to 4 Pacific time and 2 to 6 for John and Ken Pacific time. So, and also, again, bring back Brian Suits. And Brian Suits was the host of the show on Saturday called the Dark Secret Place. And Sunday was the super hyper local Sunday show. And so those shows were better than what they've got going on now. I don't even know what they're doing on Sunday, but Saturday they have one of their news guys has a show, and it's supposed to be old cases. And so if it's in old police cases and that are unsolved or something, unsolved mysteries we used to have on TV. So that kind of thing. He's got an excellent voice, and it's well produced and everything, but it's old cases. It's yesterday. It's last week. It's 6 years ago. And the Brian Suits had it right when he was current, being current. So bring back Brian Suits. So until next time, be smart, be beautiful, be polite, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.